Some shows are so good they start to live a life of their own. Yellowjackets aired and there was absolutely nothing that could stop it from becoming what it is today. In this video, we'll talk about Yellowjackets duo Juliette Lewis and Christina Ricci on the show's success and 90s classics, and get into some more Yellowjackets news. Ready? Let's dig in. Let's kick things off with what is it that sets Yellowjackets apart and made it such a success? An issue with the usual depiction of trauma narratives and female trauma in particular is that it is often shown as the ultimate experience that made them more spiritual, stronger human beings. Somehow having lived through something horrible is something to be grateful for in a way. That's not what Yellowjackets does. These girls are just regular girls. They're survivors and vulnerable, but they're also strong, brutal, and capable. They're as multifaceted as real women are, as humans are. Christina Ricci, who stepped into the role of Misty, said how the show perfectly shows how trauma doesn't necessarily make you stronger or a better person, and Yellowjackets explores how certain situations bring certain qualities of a person to the surface. Where others would help without a second's thought, others wouldn't hesitate to choose for themselves. And the series artfully shows how trauma is something that keeps echoing. It's not just something that happens, you overcome, and then it's all over, which is another issue with trauma narratives. Sometimes an event makes such a big impact that even later in life, vibrations of the trauma can cause patterns to continue cycling. By showing these characters during the trauma and long after the event has faded in the memory of others, we get a glimpse of what it's like to live with trauma, even challenges what a trauma can consist of. As Ricci puts it so poetically, not everyone who's hurt turns into an artist, and it's painful, but very refreshing to see on the screen for once. Next up, Christina Ricci on what it's like to be a girl like Misty. Despite her flaws, it's easy to have some sympathy for Misty as well. She's a loner, but also a little more than manipulative, but she's petite, which instantly makes her look sweet, letting people believe she's easy to dismiss, and doing so as well. Ricci has said that she noticed a subtle change in how people treated her on set whenever she was Misty. As she experienced it, the way Misty looks made people feel invited to tease, make corny jokes. She'd get a little sidelined, even though she was actually in the scene that was being discussed. But as Ricci said, Misty has learned to exploit the way people perceive her and weaponize it. She's smart, and she's not happy to just survive. She wants to thrive. Misty's trauma isn't necessarily what happened to her. For Misty, it's the fact that she has absolutely no social currency whatsoever, making her easily dismissible. She's not funny, she's not sexy, she can't relate to people. It's an invisible kind of trauma that most people aren't even aware is a thing in the first place, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. It's fascinating to watch Misty navigate a world that doesn't give her a chance. But what's maybe even more interesting is how base we are as human beings, so easily influenced by our perceived realities and never giving it a moment's thought. Following, Juliette Lewis's thoughts on Natalie. None of the survivors are doing particularly well at lugging their baggage with them, but the one who's perhaps struggling the most must be Natalie. Portrayed by the amazing Juliette Lewis, we watch as adult Natalie spends most of the show imploding on herself. Lewis thought of this mental regression as if Natalie was deconstructing. In a way, every time the door to the motel Natalie lives in opens, she was in a different state of deconstruction. Her eyeliner represented her war paint, and her old cool clothes represented her armor. Lewis told Screen International. Lewis expressed how it's one of her favorite things to see a human being thrown into a high-stakes situation, and Yellowjackets is a show that shines a light on how people choose to survive. To dissect this subject, the actress had long and interesting conversations with Bart Nickerson and Ashley Lyle, the creators of Yellowjackets. The result is a truly colorful survivor. Maybe Natalie is circling the drain, despite the fact that she showed such core strength as a teenager. She's fighting her demons as best as she can, however she can, and the portrayal of her authentic experience of trauma is exactly what gives fans goosebumps. Don't go anywhere just yet. We still have a few things about Yellowjackets that you don't want to miss out on. Next, Christina Ricci and Juliette Lewis on the use of 90s classics in Yellowjackets. When can we expect the next season of Yellowjackets, and what do we need to be prepared for once the day has come? Let's find out now. First up, Christina Ricci and Juliette Lewis on the use of 90s classics in Yellowjackets. There is something about the 90s pop classics. It's just such a vibe. It has a little of everything. Music of previous decades all accumulated, enveloping all the despair of the decade and often surrendered to an optimism about the future that, in hindsight, was really uncalled for. So what do Christina Ricci and Juliette Lewis think of the incorporation of all those great 90s pop classics into Yellowjackets? As both of them grew up in the 90s, the music that was used in Yellowjackets, both romantic reminded them of those times without mobile phones. When asked what their favorite songs in the shows were, they didn't need to think long to come up with a song that meant something special to them. Lewis marveled at the fact they used Fade Into You by Mazzy Star, and Ricci immediately offered Down by the Water by PJ Harvey's. Ricci was so obsessed with Down by the Water that she would actually sit in her room and draw pictures about what she thought the song could mean. We don't have to ask what the favorite song of the producers is unless it's a mistake, but they found a way to use Kiss from a Rose by Seal not once, but twice. Ricci, who proclaims she was the biggest anti-pop person on earth, says that you can't get through a certain year without knowing every single word to that song, and she kind of hates herself for still knowing every word by heart. Next, when can we expect Yellowjackets Season 2? No one was expecting that Yellowjackets would become such a huge success in such a short amount of time. To this day, the show has a rating of 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is something that rarely happens. And when viewership started to snowball on its own, it became hard to deny any longer. People are hungry for this kind of authentic, audacious storytelling. Season 2 isn't even optional. There would be riots. So when can we expect the next chapter of this story to start unfolding? Sources say that filming is set to begin in August 2022. In an interview with Vulture, Showtime Network's president Gary Levine explained that they're aiming for an annual cycle. First of all, he feels like that's simply what the audience and fans deserve. And with a show like Yellowjackets, a show with such powerful momentum, he wouldn't want to allow that to dissolve. So they're going to work very hard to make sure we can get some answers to all those questions we have. Which question about Yellowjackets Season 1 do you need answered the most? And lastly, when can we expect Yellowjackets Season 2? Who built that creepy cabin in the middle of absolutely nowhere? Depending on the answer, do we really want to know the answer to why? What is going on with Ty? And who is the girl the rest of the soccer team ate in the first episode? We're not just going to let that one slide, are we? We're so relieved that we know we'll get another season to resolve at least some of these issues. But what are some things we can expect of the upcoming season? Central to the storyline is most likely Lottie's rise as a cult leader in the past, and her resurgence in the present, and it's all but confirmed that we'll get to witness some full-blown cannibalism. Showrunner Ashley Lyle didn't say it in so many words when speaking with the playlist, but that's pretty much what it came down to. So strap yourself in for that one because that's going to be rough. Finding out what happened to Shauna's baby won't be much easier, but we'll probably get some answers in that regard as well. And Adam might be dead. Something tells us we haven't seen the last of him. Who was he really? And speaking of mystery men, who was the man in the attic? When asked about this mysterious character, showrunner Bart Nickerson told TV Line that they definitely know who he is, and even have a whole thing planned for him. Can you guess what it might be? And that's where we're gonna leave off for now. What was it about Yellowjackets that made the biggest impression on you, and why? Let us know in the comments what you think, and thanks for watching.